Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about prototypes. We'll first understand what the prototype object is. We'll then describe and diagram the relationship between DunderProto, prototype, and constructor. We'll then add methods and properties on the prototype object to write more efficient code, and explain the difference between adding methods and properties to the prototype versus the constructor function. Finally, we'll define and implement inheritance through the prototype object. But before we get to prototypes, let's quickly review one more time what the new keyword does. First, it creates an object out of thin air. Second, it sets the value of the keyword this to be that object created in the previous step. Third, it adds a return this to the constructor function. Finally, it creates a link which we can access as DunderProto between the object created and the prototype property of the constructor function. Let's talk a bit more about that point. Better yet, let's diagram this relationship. Don't be too intimidated by this diagram. We'll walk through it step by step. As a guide, a circle is a function and a square is an object. So here we have a person constructor function, which has a property called prototype, which is an object. That object has a property on it called constructor, which points back to the original constructor function. If properties or methods are placed on the person prototype, they can be accessible from any object created from that constructor function. Finally, the way in which these objects, which are created by the constructor function, get access to the prototype object is through a link called DunderProto. This link gets established when the new keyword is used. To recap, every constructor function has a property on it called prototype. This property is an object, which can have methods and properties placed on it. These methods and properties are shared and accessible by any object that is created from that constructor function when the new keyword is used. Now let's see what this looks like with a code example. I'm going to copy and paste some code in the Chrome console, and we can walk through each line of it. First, I have a constructor function called person, with a property called name. Since I have created a function, we can already see that there is a property on it called .prototype. In JavaScript, every single function has a property on it called prototype. Now I'm going to create two objects, Colt and Ellie, from my constructor function using the new keyword. Since I use the new keyword, a property has been added to each of these objects called DunderProto, which points to the prototype property on the person constructor. We'll discuss in the next video why this prototype property is so useful. Finally, the prototype object has a property on it called constructor, which points back to the original function. The constructor property is not something you'll be using or manipulating frequently, but it is an important part in a concept called inheritance, which we'll discuss in a later video. To recap, I actually want to jump back a couple slides to the diagram so we can go over it again. Remember, circles are functions and squares are objects. So here I have two objects called Ellie and Colt, which were created from the person constructor function. Since I used the new keyword when I created them, each of these objects has a property on it called DunderProto, which points to the prototype property on the person constructor. In the next video, we'll examine the prototype object and see just how useful it is. See you then.